Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all your hard work on this issue. Just to follow up on the question and I would ask that my statement be put in the record.
Yes.
I'll spend my time doing questioning.
Yes, please.
On the large trucks, what is your recommendation we do about the trucks in order to make it more friendly for everybody else out there on the road?
Well, one of the most successful truck safety bills that was passed was in 1991. Senator Lautenberg was behind that and a sponsor, as well as Senator Moynihan and Chairman John Chafee. And this was the issue of dealing with large double and triple trailer trucks that were allowed in some states but not in others, but they wanted to spread the use of those trucks. And Congress in that legislation passed what we call the freeze, where states that had allowed the triples could keep them, but states that didn't have them could not have them. And that worked tremendously. And this is what we're proposing on truck size and weights now, because we see states ratcheting up the weights, and then the trucking industry is coming to Congress saying, oh, well, we can't have this patchwork quilt, and we really need to increase truck weights to 97 and 100,000 pounds. The problem is trucks that large are incredibly dangerous and they're incredibly destructive. And so the legislation that Senator Lautenberg has sponsored is what I call a timeout, okay? States can keep what they have, but we're not going to ratchet it up any further, and we're going to keep interstate truck weights at 80,000 pounds. And that only will help safety, but it also is going to help preserve our infrastructure. The biggest cause of damage to bridges are large, overweight trucks. And, you know, as we're looking at scarce resources and trying to create a balanced freight network that relies on rail and other modes, we really need to look at whether, in fact, it is, you know, in our best interest, both from safety and investment, to allow trucks to get bigger. And so that's why safety groups, as well as truck drivers themselves, the independent operators and the Teamsters, environmental groups and bicycling groups are all supporting this legislation. Great.
Well, thank you for that description. I'm a co-sponsor of that legislation. I think it's needed, and I hope that we can move on that at some point. I wanted to focus a couple of my questions here on drunk driving and requiring ignition interlocks. And I wanted to, probably other panelist members, but I wanted to focus on Laura Dean Mooney, but others may have comments. In 2004, New Mexico adopted the first ignition interlock for all convicted drunk drivers. At the time of the adoption, New Mexico led the nation in alcohol-related fatalities. So we were number one in what is a horrible category to be number one in. Ignition interlocks were a key component of a broad strategy that also included increased enforcement and an awareness campaign that resulted in a 35% decrease in alcohol-impaired traffic fatalities. And one of the things I wanted to show you is the dramatic drop that occurred. You can see here on this chart how we've gone down, and New Mexico's making progress in terms of drunk drivers, but the dramatic drop from 2004 to 2008, where you have the 219 here and the 143, a lot of that, I think, can be attributed to ignition interlocks. Currently, over 8,000 New Mexicans have ignition interlocks, and New Mexico leads the nation in ignition interlocks per capita. Based on the raw data, ignition interlocks prevented over 63,000 alcohol-related automobile trips in the state. And although the evidence is clear that ignition interlocks work, not all states have adopted them for all convicted first-time offenders. What do you think will be required for more broad adoption by states of ignition interlocks as a tool to combat drunk driving? And other panelists may want to weigh on that too, but let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Senator Udall, certainly for your support. You hit the nail on the head, and the chart clearly illustrates that interlocks do work. But what's needed is a sanction, because we've hit the wall in a number of states in opposition, including, I mentioned in my testimony, the state of Maryland, where the chairman of the judiciary is a DUI defense attorney. He would not even allow the bill to be heard. He was asked by a Mad Volunteer if he was taking that stance based on being a DUI defense attorney or as chairman. He indicated he was taking that stance as a DUI defense attorney. Maryland's certainly not the only state. We've run into this in other states across the country. So the sanction is needed to ultimately get the states to adopt the all-offender ignition interlock legislation so that other states can have similar successes as New Mexico clearly has shown.
Thank you. And Deb Hubsmith, focusing on bicycle and pedestrian safety. I met with the New Mexico Bike Coalition during Bike Week, and during their visit they expressed their interest in improving the conditions for New Mexico bicyclists. Unfortunately, DOTs are constantly struggling to meet the capacity and maintenance needs of the roadways, and as you mentioned in your testimony, often don't provide adequate attention to the needs of users other than vehicles. Do you have recommendations for low-cost improvements that would be easily implemented and improve the conditions for pedestrians and bicyclists?
Thank you very much for that question. I would say that if the federal government adopts complete streets policy, which would be Senate Bill 584, that will go a long way toward improving conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians, because then every road, as it's being maintained, would need to consider the needs of bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users, and motorists. And this is shown to be very cost-effective. In addition to increasing the size of the different funding sources that I mentioned with regards to Senator Boxer's question, I would also remark that things like lighting on roadways, crosswalks, bike lanes, those are all very low-cost solutions that basically involve signage, lights, or paint. And very low-cost solutions can lead to a high benefit in terms of reducing injuries and fatalities. Also, speed limits are extremely important. A car traveling at 40 miles per hour, if you're hit by as a bicyclist or pedestrian, you only have a 15% chance of surviving. If it's only going 30 miles per hour, you have a 50% chance of surviving. So if we can reduce speed limits, that's also going to improve safety.
Focusing now a little bit on the bicycle driver culture, in an effort to reduce our Senate office's carbon footprint, several of my staff bike to work, and they often comment about the need for a culture change where drivers are aware of bicyclists on the road and accept them as full users. I've heard that this sort of culture change has occurred in metro areas that have a larger proportion of bicyclists, and that their roads are safer for all users as a result. Do you have recommendations for infrastructure improvements or awareness campaigns that would improve driver awareness of bicyclists on the road?
Thank you. That is a very important question. I would say that starting with school children is one way to really create more of a cultural shift in the acceptance of people walking and bicycling. Many people remember walking or bicycling to school when they were young and feel that their children or grandchildren should have the opportunity to do that today. So expanding Safe Routes to School program like Senate Bill 1156, which is bipartisan and has 22 co-sponsors, will be a great way to try to begin to make it more of a part of our culture. The kinds of facilities that will really help to improve our safety of our roadways include sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, pathways, and improvements to intersections, because many intersections are where things are most dangerous. In rural areas, being able to have wider shoulders, being able to have crosswalks, and also improving things like routes to bus stops would make for better improvements. And then finally, when elected officials like you walk or bike to school with kids or take place in events that show that this is a legitimate form of transportation that's on the increase, that improves public health and helps to improve safety, that also helps to raise the priority. And if we could work with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, if we could work with the movie theaters and all kinds of groups in order to elevate the status of walking and bicycling and show how it's a healthy alternative for America, that would make for big improvements.
Thank you. Do you have, back to Laura, do you have any comments about the Road Safe, the DWI bill that I'm an author of? Just briefly here, we only have a few
Yes,
seconds.
I do.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, first, thank you again for your sponsorship of that bill. We believe that road safe is the answer to ultimately eliminating drunk driving. The development of technology is progressing rapidly, and we know that already cars can park themselves. They can do a number of things, including lane departure warnings. So the idea that technology in a car, advanced technology in a car that would be set at .08 and wouldn't hassle a sober driver, would be unobtrusive to those of us who choose to drive sober, would be the ultimate solution to eliminating drunk driving.
Thank you, and thank you for your courtesies, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you to the panel. Very good panel today.